Bartholomew Town is brought to you in part by the University of Rhode Island Online, Navigant Credit Union, the Audubon Society of Rhode Island, Newport Film, and Half Street Group.
Bartholomew Town.
Continuing our work on shoreline access and really just in general, everything surrounding, I don't know how to even frame this, but some of the nonsense that we've seen come up from time to time. I mean, there's endless examples of how people in power, municipal power, state power, and really just in the private sector, more than anything, homeowners have blockaded access to the ocean, which is something protected by our Constitution here in Rhode Island. And there's this weird sort of subcategory of this whole discussion known as fire districts. And many of these are defunct. And these are using unconstitutional charters with bizarre and sometimes almost seeming like high school level, you pick the high school president type of level voting practices to govern access to parts of our coastline and access to parts of just our state in general. And someone who's been keeping an eye on this a lot is Melissa Jenkins, who joins us today here on the podcast. Thanks so much for your work. Thanks so much for your time. I guess for those who don't know you, which, hey, you're missing out, the executive summary of who you are and the work you've done, because it's bountiful.
Oh, thank you, Bill. Thank you very much for taking the time to shed some light on this issue. We always say sunlight is the best disinfectant, but it's been hard to get attention to this issue. And I think part of the reason for that is that people think it's just a local issue affecting the residents of Bonnet Shores. And that is absolutely not true. This is an issue that affects all residents of Rhode Island because, as you dutifully noted, the Constitution protects our right to shoreline access. And these small districts are controlling access to the shoreline. They're actually taking state money and state grants and claiming to improve neighborhoods and roads and shoreline access, but they're performing work on private property, and they're funding this with grants paid for by tax dollars from throughout Rhode Island and even the federal government. So every taxpayer is paying into these funds, but not every taxpayer can access the areas that are being so-called improved by these grants that are received. And the level of oversight for these agencies is completely absent. So these are government agencies. They provide general government functions, and there are 86 special districts in Rhode Island. 31 of them are fire districts. So a lot of people are living in these special districts. Most of them are using constitutional voting principles. So a recent legal review showed that there are 4, I believe, that are not.
Yeah.
So let's say at least 4 are not using constitutional protections, but none of them have the level of oversight of a municipality even. So, for example, the elections are not overseen by the Board of Elections or the Secretary of State or any meaningful oversight at the municipal level even. So once control of this agency is lost, there's no oversight that can correct that function. And that's what's happened in Bonnet Shores. This is a really crazy story. And parts of this are unique, but I think parts of this could happen to any special district. And it's certainly an example of government corruption.
Yeah. And kind of building on that in a message actually you sent me, quite frankly, that those 4 fire districts using unconstitutional charters, and recommended that the legislature immediately change those charters to remove. There's been recommendations from that legal review, that recommend those constitutional or unconstitutional voting practices are changed. But the legislature has been refusing for years to amend the 1932 charter of the Bonnet Shores Fire District because it is being used to benefit some insiders. This is a message that you sent me. So let's talk about that. Why in the world is this still happening? It's 2025. People are aware of this at least a grassroots, if not a more macro level. How is this allowed to continue?
That is a great question, and I think that's where the corruption comes in. When I first moved to this neighborhood in 2018, I, like any good civically minded person, went to some of the meetings for the fire district to find out what they did. I honestly thought they provided fire service. I had no idea. And I thought I was walking into a nice, friendly neighborhood um, association type meeting. There were police there, Bill. There was yelling. People were red in the face, almost coming to blows. Sometimes they do come to blows. And there are police details at almost every meeting. It is nuts. And as someone who, my husband and I have owned a home here since 1998, and we had absolutely no idea what was going on. And I was embarrassed about that. Honestly, I should have been paying more attention, but I wasn't. And many people were not. So I began a Facebook page that started a neighborhood association. And I began live broadcasting these meetings because they were actually telling us that they were a private corporation and didn't have to follow any kind of open meetings laws, provide minutes of the meetings, do any kind of announcements to the public about how they were spending our tax dollars. They collect taxes. These are not voluntary fees. These are taxes. And for most residents in Bonnet Shores, these are about $500 a year. So I've personally paid thousands of dollars into these tax funds, and they are not providing any essential public services at this point in time. They're not providing fire service. They're not providing road service. They do make general laws. They make ordinances. They hire security guards that even patrol roads and go to people's homes, and especially restrict access to beaches, these security guards, and they pick up the trash. But that's about $140,000 worth of funding, and they're collecting over $500,000 worth of funding every year. Where are they spending this money? They're writing no-bid contracts with the Bonnet Shores Beach Club, which is a huge corporation in our midst with over 2,000. The number that I saw in court documents is that there are 2,700 individual investors in this corporation. And these people all own a share of this private commercial property. And because our charter says that property owners who own more than $400 worth of property can vote, all of these commercial investors who own a share in a commercial property have been told that they have, quote unquote, the right to vote. Their management internally tells them that they have the right to vote, tells them to vote, and tells them exactly who to vote for. So 2,700 people in an organized manner are putting up their own slate of candidates, running the election. They held the election, quote election, at their private facility with their staff on duty, and designed the ballot, counted the ballot, put their own shareholders on the ballot, and completely ran this so-called election, and not surprisingly took over every single seat on the Bonnet Shores Fire District Council. Again, this is supposed to be a government agency, but there is no government oversight of the election. So a private corporation completely took over the board of the government fire district and is taxing, creating laws, enforcing laws, levying fines, and restricting the conduct of residents. This is a huge civil rights violation.
Yeah, it's outrageous. And it's also, pardon me, it's also like a, it reminds you of something you'd read about, like Boss Tweed or something, some class you'd hear, or even Elon Musk. It's just, it's so on the surface corrupt, or at least at minimum, you could use the word seemingly wrong and unconstitutional, that again, it's shocking that this is continuing to exist. And the reality is that, like you said, people are paying into this, whatever you want to call it, organization, entity, and they're not providing fire suppression services. They're not providing any essential services to the district. So what in the world is the scheme based upon, and how has it been allowed to continue? So what's the next step here? I mean, you've been a loud and, or I should say vocal and prominent activist in this space. What happens next? What can actually be done to try to move? What is the state representative and senator that represents Bonnet Shores, which would be who? Who are your locals?
So our local state representative is Carol McEntee. Carol McEntee is herself a shareholder in the Bonnet Shores Beach Club, who should recuse herself from any dealings with that company. She did not recuse herself when our charter a charter revision was actually submitted to the legislature. I believe this was 4 years ago, or possibly 5. There was a charter review commission based on the successful lawsuit that residents were forced to file because they simply refused to amend the charter. So they were told the charter was unconstitutional, given a chance to work with the Secretary of State, Nellie Gorbea, who offered to voluntarily sit with them, change the charter, and submit it to the legislature. They declined repeatedly to even discuss it. And that's when I knew something was really rotten in Bonnet Shores. When you hear that you're doing something illegal and there's an easy avenue to fix it, and you simply refuse to take the easy avenue, then you know something's very wrong. Yeah. So we did sue and force them to change the charter. So we agreed to appoint a charter commission. We agreed on the membership of that commission. The charter commission met for at least 12 public sessions. They created an amended charter and they submitted it to the legislature. It went to the Judiciary Committee at the House first, and Carol McEntee was the sponsor of this bill. She agreed to sponsor it, but the night before this was heard in the Judiciary Committee, she got 2 donations. She got $1,000 from a PAC controlled by the chair of the Fire District Council, who is Carol O'Donnell, and she got an individual donation. Exactly the same donations went to the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. So the chair and the vice chair of the committee hearing the legislation in the House Judiciary Committee received donations the night before it was heard by a party interested in the outcome of the legislation. The legislation, not surprisingly, was held for further study. They claimed they had minor differences with the length of time you had to be a resident in order to vote. But rather than amend those and move on and enhance the constitutional amended charter, they refused to move it forward, and it died in committee. And then we went 3 years without having an election. So the illegally elected people who were already in power, including the chair, Carol O'Donnell, the largest investor in the Bonnet Shores Beach Club, by the way, from all public records that I can discern. This is the largest single investor who holds the chair of the Fire District Council. Stayed in power, let herself continue, even though her term had expired, for 3 years while they were able to sweep this under the carpet at the legislature. Then finally, residents sued again to force an election. But because it was so close to the time of the election, they wanted to hold it in the summer when all the beach club members are in town. They were given the go-ahead by the court to hold another unconstitutional election. And they held the circus of an election that was at the Bonnet Shores Beach Club, patrolled by all of their staff, not surprisingly elected all of their shareholders to seats on the council, and they are continuing to run this as an outgrowth of the private corporation, and are continuing to apply for and receive public grant funding that they're directing to benefit the private corporation in part.
Bartholomew Town.
Birds are disappearing from our landscape at a rapid pace. Over 1/3 of those breeding on Audubon Society of Rhode Island's wildlife refuges are in decline. Climate change has taken a toll on their migration, nesting, and food sources. While science is highlighting the problem, Audubon is working on real solutions with a plan to rapidly reduce their carbon emissions. The organization will be free of fossil fuels by 2030, with renewable energy powering Audubon's buildings, equipment, and vehicles. To shape our future, all of us must act. Learn more about repowering Audubon, their avian research, and how you can join their fight for climate resiliency. Visit asri.org/repower.
Newport Film screens the latest, critically acclaimed documentary films year-round across Rhode Island. Like a film festival, Newport Film often gets early access to films before they're available online or in the theaters. Stay up to date on their latest screening events at newportfilm.com or on Instagram at Newport Film. Are you looking to advance in your career or explore a new field? The University of Rhode Island now offers a comprehensive portfolio of fully online programs designed to bring world-class education to you anytime, anywhere. Choose from a wide range of flexible, asynchronous programs in business and leadership, data, tech, and STEM, healthcare and pharmacy, marine and environmental science, and more. With expert faculty and innovative courses, you'll gain the skills and knowledge to thrive in today's competitive world. Are you ready to take the next step? Visit uri.edu/online and discover how URI Online can help you achieve your goals. URI Online, learn anywhere with us. Half Street Group brings a new generation's perspective to leadership communication, strategic public relations, and digital marketing. Half Street helps organizations and leaders take control of their own stories and manage their reputations. They get results for their clients by focusing on audience message and culture and by leveraging their decade-long relationship with media and opinion leaders in the Ocean State and throughout New England. Join me and Half Street Group founder and president Mike Rea for a conversation every month about news of the day, the hottest media analysis, and a look behind the scenes at how impactful leaders drive conversations. Learn more at halfstreetgroup.com. As Rhode Island's first ever member-owned credit union, Navigant Credit Union has been a staple in the local business community for more than 108 years. Today, Navigant is a $3.4 billion institution serving more than 136,000 members across 25 physical branch locations. But since its founding in 1915, the mission has never changed. Navigant Credit Union's team of financial professionals have remained committed to improving the financial well-being of the families, businesses, and communities they serve across Rhode Island. Learn more at navigantcu.org.
It almost seems like this entire, even those that have complied constitutionally, it almost seems like it would be a moment to revisit why these entities are allowed to exist to begin with. For example, like what constitutionally aligned or compliant fire district or other special district provides essential services? I mean, what's the mechanic behind these? Why do these even exist to begin with? And or if not to begin with, why have them continue on in any way, even if they are constitutionally compliant?
Yeah, I think in the beginning there was a reasonable reason for them to exist, and that is that they were popular in rural areas where there were not many municipal services. There was no fire protection or road services when Bonnet Shores was founded in the early 1900s. So when there got to be kind of a critical number of people living here, I don't know how many, maybe 40 or 50 at that time in 1932, they wanted a mechanism to pool their resources and hire fire and road services. So it made sense at that time for them to have the ability to tax and spend as a community. But it's long since outlived that usefulness. And you have to wonder, the popularity of these now being formed, seems to be local control, that people want control over local resources. But this is a privilege for people who live, especially in these more wealthy shoreline districts. I don't see people in downtown Providence forming these special districts, for example. Maybe I'm just ignorant. Maybe they do exist. But I see these as kind of a playground for the privileged to have more control than the average person over their community. And, I'm not even sure that I have a problem with that if we're using constitutional voting and the residents are actually controlling this. As long as the rights of everybody are respected, this might be a great thing. If we're, as a community, pooling our funds and cleaning the beach so that everybody can enjoy it, that's reasonable. If we're pooling our funds and hiring security guards to keep people off the beach because we happen to live here, that's not acceptable. And that's more like what we're doing at this point in time, because the private corporate interest is selling access to the beach. What they are selling is a large parking lot and access to a private beach clubhouse, if you will. So they're selling that. They don't want people to have free access to the beach because that intrudes on their business model.
Right. Well, is there a next step in the immediate future that you see trying to resolve this year and the next year or so?
Yeah, this is an easy legislative solution. So the legal review, the sun, surf, and suppression, unconstitutional voting restrictions in Rhode Island beach enclaves by Juris Doctorate candidate at Roger Williams University School of Law, David Marks. I want to give credit to the author of this publication because this was an independent review by a legal scholar that was peer-reviewed and published in the Law Review. So this is a high-level legal opinion. And the high-level legal opinion is that the best solution is for the General Assembly to immediately and unilaterally apply the same voting rights as are used in the majority of these fire districts. And that is to simply determine voting by residency, age of majority. So any 18-year-old who is eligible to vote in any general or special election in that municipality would apply to all fire districts that operate as general government agencies. So the same level of protection as are used in the vast majority of fire districts can unilaterally and immediately be enacted by the General Assembly. They can do that. And Speaker Shekarchi would be the one to engineer this because there are multiple fire districts involved. So it's not just one locality. This is multiple localities. This is something that the Speaker and the Senate President can engineer themselves and do immediately. So that can be done. They could also act at the legislative level to place these elections under some sort of state supervision, such as the Board of Elections or Secretary of State, so that there is some oversight if these went awry. They could do that. You know, if they didn't want to do that, they could also simply suspend the charters of the ones that are unconstitutional and force local control, force the local agencies to come up with their own revisions that would make these constitutional. You know, I think Bonnet Shores is too far gone at this point because we don't have control of the local agency anymore. Our local fire district council is controlled by a business that is profiting from its possession. So we can't say it's under local control anymore. And asking the local folks, you know, other than the Charter Commission, which was appointed by a court and has the authority to reform our charter, they should not accept charter revisions by this illegally elected council at this point, because this is a private commercial interest. Yeah. So I think the General Assembly has to either act unilaterally or has to act under the court-appointed Charter Revision Committee, one or the other. But given that this is affecting multiple communities and not just one locality, I think the best solution is exactly what the legal scholar says, to immediately amend the charters of the unconstitutional fire districts, all four of them, to be constitutional. The General Assembly can do that unilaterally. They have made unilateral charter changes before, and this is a matter of constitutional law. This should be a simple and perfunctory process that the General Assembly can do right now. So if this is not corrupt at the state level, that's exactly what we're going to see happen. If it is corrupt at the state level, honestly, it's time to bring in the federal government for oversight, because this is nuts.
Yeah. Wow. What a deal. What a tributary of reality that we find ourselves in here. And you've done an amazing job of staying on top of it, and we certainly will as well. Anything else you want to add?
Oh my goodness. There is a petition on change.org if people would like to find that. We also have recorded the so-called election and the public meetings leading up to that election, and describing how that was conducted. So if people are interested in seeing just how crazy and how, completely below the line where this should be for a government election, just how completely out of line this is with any kind of governing body, those are publicly available. People can reach out to me through any social media channel. I have a publicly accessible Facebook page, Melissa Jenkins Mangili, and a publicly accessible YouTube channel where some of the recording is available. So if people want to see just how crazy this is for themselves, they can do that.
They ought to. They ought to go see it and get a sense of what's going on here.
Yeah, everything that I'm saying is available in public records. So I want to be very clear that this is factual information. I think this has been documented from time to time in the media, but we lack local media coverage. Unfortunately, that's something that has really been eroded in the last decade or so. And when I went to this so-called election, there was no media there. Not a single member, not a single journalist that I could find. So, to get the word out, I actually just started live streaming on my own Facebook page. And they hated that. There was an immediate negative reaction, and an in-uniform employee of the Bonnet Shores Beach Club actually started following me around, verbally taunting me and harassing me for more than 3 hours while I attended this election, stood over me, shined a bright spotlight, yelled derogatory comments, and told me that he was filming me for more than 3 hours, including while I filled out a ballot. This is in no way, shape, or form a legal government election process. That's harassment, it's voter intimidation, and there's no oversight.
Yeah.
No oversight at all.
Yeah, that's garbage. That's what that is. So,
yeah.
Melissa Jenkins, keeping an eye on a weird situation that we have here in this state that is, maybe we'll have a resolution, maybe not. To be determined. We'll stay on it here at Bartholomew Town.
Thank you, Bill. This can easily change, and it needs to change. The General Assembly enacted this charter, and it needs to revise this charter, and it can do so immediately and unilaterally, and that's what needs to happen here.
Hey, thanks for stopping by Bartholomew Town. For more content, follow me on Instagram at Bill Bartholomew.